I got the dust collector hooked up a month ago and it's working great. So, and for the first time in life, it's outside the shop, so it's not in there making a rumble every time I'm sucking chips. Only problem
Well,
is they never put big enough containers for the chips on the cyclones, and they're always a bite. Of course, I got a grizzly, but they're a bite to get out and dump. So
The new ones are actually, most of them have it where a, a thing with just two levers comes down and seals the can, and the can's on rollers.
you know,
Uh,
I probably made that's probably my error. Mine has a clip on that, but I piped it in so tight that I didn't allow for it to drop the can down and roll it out.
it's a
So I have to blame myself. So
great convenience. The other thing, um, there's a company in Canada. I'm trying to think. They make blast gates that you uh, simply put a little thing on the switch to your tool, like the
yes,
control switch, and it opens the blast gate, and it closes the one, another one if it's open. And they make a gizmo for about 75 bucks that you put a little thing on the wall, and you put this thing underside the lid. There's no wires to connect, but when that gets to the danger level, this thing comes on, starts flashing red, and makes a signal.
I was with a friend this past week, and he's in a retirement home, and he took me to show me their shop, and they have an Oneida dust collector, but they have that device on every blast gate in the shop because every machine's hooked up to it, and it shuts off all the others or whatever and opens that one. And
And
like
when
you say, when the tank gets full, then the red light comes on. So
yeah, and when you shut everything off, it still opens that one gate to let the machine breathe and not be
yep,
labored. But
it's
they're great up to 4 inches. In my new shop, I've got true industrial equipment, it takes 5 and 6 inch things. The gates become $300-400 a piece.
oh wow, that's just a little expensive.
So I'm in the old manual labor mode.
I've learned to do the dance of closing this gate, open this gate, and if I hear it sucking hard, I'll know I didn't get one open or one closed. So
I put a floor sweep in my new shop, and I really like that. You can just sweep all the stuff over there, and it's gone.
Stevens Trade had that, didn't they, Doug? When we were over
yeah,
there
yeah,
for the club meeting or something.
yeah.
I sweep it up. Although this weekend my granddaughter was visiting for Easter, and she came out to my shop with me. She said, "Pa, your shop needs to be cleaned." So she promptly swept all the chips up. I was glad she didn't see it before the dust collector. So,
Obviously, she's been taught well by somebody, but not by Pa, I think.
Yeah, that without a dust collector, it's like Tom Sawyer's father's cabin that you had to take soundings to navigate the room. Well, I can remember in my first shop, I had a planer that the chips just came out onto the board and onto the floor from there, and it was terrible.
before the dust collector, I just pushed the shop door open and left the planer blow the chips out in the driveway, except my truck was sitting there and it got totally covered. Ridiculous, ridiculous.
Well, the new dust blowers too take out, I don't know, 97 point something or other percent down to 4 microns. And with my old system, I moved it over from the old shop. But if I did a lot of milling in here, you would see a haze in the air. You had to wear a respirator. With a new one, there isn't a speck of dust in the air. It's amazing.
Ernie, I was in your shop probably 35, 40 years ago, and you weren't there, but somebody there demonstrated it's like a planer, but it was like a hand plane where it just made one big shaving off of the board.
That was a Hitachi surfacing machine. And they're used by Japanese timber framers. And they mostly timber frame and cedar. And it essentially is a big fixed knife hand plane in which rubber rollers push the timber, and it will leave. We actually used to demonstrate it at shows with a great big rubber stamp. We'd stamp piece of cedar, and then we'd run it through and hand the shaving to the customer, and you could read it. Would take off that, Hitachi super surfacing machine thing. Maranaka made them, and so did Makita.
I know I was impressed with it when I saw it.
Yeah, heck of a machine.
It sounds counterintuitive though. Did it actually not chip and stuff? It finished smoothly?
Yeah, but again, we're in cedar and grain, and you would always try to be cutting downhill on the grain. But you could vary the knife angle to any amount of diagonal you want. So it did, and it had an adjustable throat. It had the blade.
They don't make them.
Oh yeah, still made in Japan.
So today this is week 52 of our coffee hour. Illustrious time. Next week will be the anniversary of our first meeting. So John's going to hopefully bring bells and whistles and all that sort of stuff. I'd like to welcome everybody. We've grown from a small club of trying to get Zoom to work a year ago to this. Now we're welcoming people from around the world, and it's really great to see Kai and Mike join us again. Before I get started on it, I'd like to, does anybody have a show and tell or something they'd like to put on the list so I can sort of put you on the list here? I'm creating a list for myself. I'm not seeing a wave of, oh, Bruce Lamb has something. And who else do I see here? I'm going to highlight you, Bruce, give you a spotlight you so that you can do your thing. Do you need to share your video or share your screen?
Yeah, I didn't think we were going to start there, but okay. So last time I talked was my adventures in trying to learn how to hollow a little bit, and this was the shape that was giving me the most problem. So I went back to it, of course, because I couldn't resist. So this is about, I think this is about 6 inches in diameter and 2.5 to 3 inches deep. And I was a little more successful the second time around. Hard maple, I find, gives me a pretty decent finish, actually, with the particular hollowing set I'm using. And without any real effort, I kind of get that kind of finish there, looking on the inside, the little LED. And it felt pretty good. In the end, I didn't love the shape. I think I'm still working on the shapes a little bit. I think it's too symmetrical and a little too puffy there. That was just hard maple. I then went on to some ambrosia maple. This one, I had a very nice detailed piece towards the collar, but I kind of screwed it up, I think, with the sanding. But in any case, here I tried to go for a little more asymmetry, a little different shape here, and it seemed to go pretty well. So now after about doing 5 or 6 of these, I think I'm getting the hang of it. Still not easy, but it's much better. And this one really finished up in a nice way. And then I have one more, which was Oregon myrtle that I went. And here I went with much more of a flat top and seemed to get it in a shape that I like a lot, actually. But I'm still playing. I'd be interested in some feedback on shapes that other people have done with hollow forms like this. But I still feel like I haven't quite got the exact shape that I'd like. But anyway, that's what I had.
Bruce, I have a comment on that. I think you're talking about shapes, and that first one you showed with the kind of a symmetrical rounded edge, and this one has more of a sharp edge. The sharp edge to me seems to look a little nicer shape, a little flat bottom, wider, widened rounded bottom and a flatter top with that sharp edge. Does look more attractive than the first one.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I agree.
Any other comments?
First one's a little more like a mushroom, follows nature a little more.
That's true. It does have a mushroom kind of shape to it. That's absolutely true.
Rising bread, or rising bread, as I see sometimes in the kitchen.
I think the debate of sharp edge versus clean edge or smooth edge on forms like that could be a lifelong debate, because if you take a look through any wood turning book of bowls or forms, you see both quite regularly. So I think it's a personal preference, but anyway.
Well, I tried to show a film a while back and it didn't come up. And I'm on for next month for showing a video for the demonstration. So I want to just make sure that I can share screen and get this video to play. All right, can you see that video?
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right, well, it's playing. This was the one I was going to show about doing that two-spouted vessel.
Yeah.
Cut the corners off and then drilled it on the lathe. So there
Okay.
I made a pattern, and I set my two lines on the center line of the drill that I wanted, set
Yep.
my sliding bevel, and then just turn it 90 degrees and scribe a line. And then you can I'll just skip across here to speed it up a little bit. So I scribed a line on all four corners, and this has already been cut. So you'll after I get that line on there, then I peeled the tape. I taped the corners back on just to show the demonstration, but just peel the corners off, and there's your bandsaw cut. So that cuts the four corners at 90 degrees to the drilling line. Then I took it over on the lathe. Well, I brought the lines around to the side. Then I put it on the lathe and made a tenon that I could grip in the chuck. I'm speeding, they're skipping through this here. I have a set of drills, 12-inch long twist drills, and they work real nice for drill. There's the tenon that goes into the chuck. There's a drill. And we got a little bit of a wobble, but it does get the center in there. So that just made it so much simpler to do than if you remember the jigs and such that Bill made. I didn't have to make any jigs, just chuck it into the lathe and run the drill through it. So I don't know why that video didn't run before when I was trying to set it up, but
Seems you got it right now.
looks like it's working okay. Yeah. So at any rate, that's what how I did that. End up drilling that way. Then I can then put it on center and start doing the turning of the base and all the other parts of it, the bandsaw and so forth. So
Cool.
okay.
Thanks, Ron.
So I can stop sharing.
Thank you. So before I go into what lathe to buy, is there anybody that's got a tool or something unusual that they'd like to show the group? Bill, go ahead. What you got there?
Okay, can you see it? Yeah, thank you. Yeah, what this is, you see it's a golf club handle, and Randy Smith from Susquehanna Club made this and gave this to me. And what it is, you guys were talking the other week about carbide tips. I don't think this is carbide, but it works the same way. You can rotate it to a new fresh one and but I use this for the bottom of my, any vessel that I do. It cleans up the bottom before I decorate the bottom a little bit. But it's very heavy, solid. Randy did an incredible job with this to make it, but I thought it's rather unique, and I like it, but it has a golf handle into it. So you can see it's tapered a little bit. But
So it's got a good swing is what you're saying.
yes, it does. Oh, you could. It's pretty heavy. It's good.
Thanks, Bill.
Okay.
Does anybody else have anything?
Doug, Mike Lebo.
Okay, you're on.
So this is a tool that is a work in progress, but it's very sharp up on this edge, and you can use it just like the Russian doll guys to come across. It's basically I call it a skew with steroids.
When you say it's a tool in progress, what do you mean?
Well, I'm still working on grinding certain parts of it, but I've used it a couple times. It's just that I got to get some of the edges back here honed away and out of
So
the
it
way. So
worked-
when you come across, it doesn't get in the way.
And how are you finding it working? Is it really,
It's amazing how fast it works.
does it catch very much, or is it, are you,
No, because of the angle that you come at it, it sort of slices.
And Mike,
Cool.
you said you made that. What
Yep.
what metal did you start with?
The piece up on the blade is a piece of high-speed steel. It's 1/4 inch thick by 1.5 inches wide by 6 inches long when I purchased it. This was
Okay.
cut down to about 2.5 inches.
Yeah,
And I had a guy weld it into this rod for me.
gotcha.
cool.
So
And did you, are you rounding the base so that it rolls better, or is it, when you say on the,
yeah,
'cause-
right on the edge here, it needs ground off because that bumps into the wood sometimes.
but also that whole
Bigger.
bottom surface, is that square or round? Because I was thinking about the way it was rolling
It-
on the
it's round.
banjo. It is round, okay.
Yeah, it's actually a piece of steel for concrete forms.
Okay, that works.
So it's heavy.
Rebar.
Rebar.
No, it's not rebar. It's they use it. These little holes in here are when they put the concrete forms down, they can nail the wood right through them.
Oh,
Oh, cool.
Okay, I'm
Thank you.
done.
Thank you, Mike.
Yep.
Anybody else got anything?
Yeah, I've got a little tool that I'd like to show, Kai. So can you see that?
Yes, I can.
I bought it together at a car boot sale with some wood turning tools, but I think this is not a wood turning tool. It's some other kind of tool. It has got a nice wooden handle, and then it's bent at the end here. And it's got kind of little teeth here, a bit like maybe a rasp or something like that, but I don't know what it is meant for. No idea. It just looked nice, and because I bought some other tools there, I took this one as well. So any idea what that could be?
Kai, that looks like a tool I used when I was in high school many years ago, making gun stocks. And we did, on the hand grip, we had checkering. We had a little rasp like that that had maybe 2 rows, some had only 1 row, some had 2 or 3 rows of teeth. And you'd scribe a line and then with a single row, and then you'd put the 2 row in and follow the line. Made little hand grips on a rifle stock.
Okay, that might be.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it has got 3 rows of teeth.
Yeah, I'll bet that's what it is.
Okay. Right. Thanks a
So,
lot.
I suspect that it's a threading tool.
I came up with the same thing, that it was maybe a checkering tool. Here's mine.
Hang on a second, Arnie. I have to take Kai off the spotlight. Go ahead.
There's Ernie.
I'm on-
Gotcha.
These are ones that my
Yeah,
dad and I made when I was a boy. They're made out of 01 oil hardening drill rod, and we simply filed the checkering tools out. But as he said there's 2 rows of teeth here,
Yeah,
and you put 1 row in the last row, and that way you can always cut them parallel, and they're really a rasp. They're not a file.
yeah, yeah. I used those a long time ago when I was in high school.
Yeah, there's a single row for recutting a row, another one. Here's a double row,
Yeah, yeah.
and I don't know what this one is.
Yeah, my dad had a gun shop. He made guns, and I used to work in the shop helping him.
Yep, I think you're right on in that one. It could be a lock mortise chisel refiled to that use too.
Yeah.
Thank you, gentlemen.
Yeah, okay, thanks a lot.
So now we come to the subject that everybody's no doubt anxious to hear. And before we get into it deeply, I'm going to share my screen. So this is a lathe. It actually belonged to my wife's grandfather, who was her father was born. Her grandfather was 61 or 62. So this goes back to the turn of the last century type of lathe. And I just bought this just to show guys, you know, first of all, if anybody wants an antique wooden lathe, there you go. But you know, if you, this is what I call a beginner's lathe nowadays. So anyway, you know, we're talking about lathes, and when it really comes down to what lathe we buy, I think what we're talking about is, rather than talking about the lathe itself, we're talking about the embellishments of lathes. So I'm just gonna see if I can stop my share here. In the discussion this morning for on lathes, I'm particularly interested, and I know there's lots of people have their hand up. So if you, we'll try and limit people as if there's a whatever, without necessarily trying to cut people off. But one of the things I'm very interested in hearing about from people is not just what they would recommend, but I think Ernie mentioned it last week towards the end of our discussion that we have things about the lathe we bought that we don't like and would change. And for example, one of the things I don't like about my Powermatic lathe is that it's a 3250 C, I think, or whatever it is. But my problem is that it's a really really strong lathe, so I can put a big piece of wood on there. But the E-stop is on the other side from where I normally stand for turning. So if I started getting into a vibration system or a brake or something like that, I have to go around a dangerous piece of wood to get to where the E-stop is. And unlike the one-way lathe or something like that, where you can actually turn the controls to the other side. So that's one of the drawbacks of that lathe. So anyway, I'm just opening the floor to discussion. What lathe would you guys either recommend or like to have, or what about your own lathe? Would you like to change? And I'm going to sort of try and flag through. If people wave their hand or something like that, you can, or just speak up. Barry Price, go for it.
I just placed an order, in fact, for a new lathe. My current lathe, the one that I'm getting rid of, is a Jet 1442, I think is how it's sold. It has variable speed, but the variable speed is provided by Shiv pulleys. And the lowest speed end on it is around 440 RPM, which is just too fast for doing certain, maybe not turning, but certain procedural things on the lathe. And so I wanted to get a much lower RPM.
Barry, you also have to have the lathe running to change speed, right?
Yes, you do. Or at least
drawback also.
You have to be hand turning it. I mean, you either running or hand turning.
Yeah.
It's kind of putting a manual transmission in gear. You have to have a clutch feature or something. Something has to facilitate it. But anyhow, that presents a, if you last used it at spindle turning, you know, at 1800 or 2000 RPM or something, and you forget to turn it down before you turn it on, you got your hands full all of a sudden with high RPM and shattered bolt. And so electronic variable speed and a low RPM capability got me down the road of basically 3 candidates. I also did not want to spend $7,000 on a large one way or something, but the Scout was the robust Scout was the highest priced item I considered, and I like most of its features. I didn't care for the fact that the bed is non-magnetic. The bedways, I think, are stainless steel, and therefore some fixturing jigs, I rely on these magnet switch things, and you couldn't use them on that. But it had a lot going for it. What it didn't have going for it was about $4,400 to get it the way you'd want it. So that came down to a Laguna 1836, which is an 18-inch swing, 36-inch bed, and a Jet 1840. Because the Jet was on sale for 10% off, as Powermatic and Jet tools quite often are, and Woodcraft was offering free shipping, it put the Jet at about $2,350 full up, delivered. Now what it has going for it, I made up a little list here. Along with the price, the variable speed is it's on a 2-pulley system. The low speed is 40 to 1200, which covers pretty much any kind of bowl consideration. And then the high speed is 100 to 3200. And it is electronically, it's like a downside is that instead of a button bump or something like that, it has a rotating rheostat kind of switch. And so I can see where it would be easy to bump and change the speed inadvertently. So I may have to make some kind of shield for that. It has reverse. It's got 2 horsepower. It's a 3-phase motor that they do an electronic inverter switch with, and so you wire it to 220, but single phase. A positive thing in my consideration is its weight. It's 414 pounds, so it's pretty substantial on the floor. It has a very nice indexing system, 36 position indexing system. And something Doug was just mentioning, it has a positionable power off switch. It's on about a 6-foot umbilical cord, and it's magnetic. And you can put it on the bed, on the lathe, on the legs, anywhere you want, wherever it's a magnetic surface. Typically, I would guess right about where your knee might be, so you can bump it in a hurry. And it's got a 5-year warranty, whereas most lathes only have a 1 or 2 year. The Laguna 1836, first of all, was $2,750 versus, so it's $400 more. Amazon does do free shipping on it. The warranty is 2 years. It's a 1.5 horsepower motor without a positionable switch. Otherwise, the 2 products look very similar. So I'll be getting, they won't be able to ship it until the first week in May, so I can't give you a report on how happy I am with it.
Barry, I'd like to make a couple of comments on that, some of the things you said. One of the things, Doug, you're talking about the switch on the 3520B model, which is I think what you have. It's what I have also. You have the fixed position switch, but on the C model, the new one they just come out with, they do have a cable control on that. And I've thought about it. I'm not sure how complicated it is to make up a switch of your own, but I've thought about that. one of the things that you mentioned, Barry, is a weight. I would guess if you're going to do heavy turning, you're probably going to want to weigh that a little bit. Because my Powermatic weighs about 650, and I had it walking across the painted floor. So I mounted it on rubber pads, and that's quite a bit.
Well,
the other thing you mentioned was the speed control, the little reset knob. I use that all the time to start and stop my lathe. And I've never had any trouble with it moving or bumping into it while I'm running. So I think that's pretty secure. Anyway, some comments that I made a note of as you were talking there.
I think one of the things you mentioned about the weight of lathes, and people ask me something about speed when I'm turning, and I say when both you and the lathe aren't shaking, you're running the right speed. But
yeah,
you know, almost any lathe, if you get it off center, and the biggest problem with the big lathes is that there is a tendency to think that because it's a big lathe, it won't shake. So you start it up, and lo and behold, you're out of whack all of a sudden.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
So anybody else got a lathe that they would really, if they were going to sell it or whatever, have had good experience with it?
So I have the 3520C, the new Powermatic, and I think you guys are talking around the features that they really have changed on this model. The power, the emergency switch is really nice, the way you can move it everywhere. And I think I showed when I showed the hollowing that I absolutely put it at the other end of the lathe. But they also fixed the spindle lock issue that was really difficult, I think, on the prior versions. That way the lathe, the 3520C weighs in at about 700 pounds. And I too have the same problem with it walking on a painted floor. And I actually going to take Ron's suggestion. I've heard others say it too, to put some rubber under the feet, which is probably the way to fix that. And I actually have an epoxy floor, which I think makes it even worse.
I have some 1/2-inch thick mine conveyor belt, and I cut some squares off of that and put it under my pads, leveled it up. And that's another key thing. You got to level the lathe.
Yeah.
I heard somebody talking about that, and they said that the points didn't line up from the tail stock to the headstock. And they said, well, this is a heavy cast iron lathe. It can't twist. It does twist. You got to level it and set those points perfect. And yeah, it will twist. But these mine belts, it stopped it. It just sits there now, never moves.
Yeah, my floor is level, but it's interesting because with that epoxy smooth floor, I can push it on the floor fairly easily, actually. It amazes me that I can push it on the floor.
Oh yeah, I slid mine across the garage floor to position it when I bought it. 650 pounds.
So if we have somebody that comes up to us and says they want to buy a lathe, but they don't want to spend over $1,000, is there anything in the new market that's even worth looking at as far as you guys are concerned?
You're looking at a smaller swing, maybe a 12-inch or 14-inch swing and a shorter bed. But yeah, there's some, I think some good lathes in that price range.
They can buy my jet.
Well, that's a
yeah, there you go.
I might add that the emergency stop feature and the fact that with a lot of lathes now you can position the control button anywhere on the machine with a magnetic base, and that's an option on a lot of lathes today. It's nice. But if you look to OSHA regulations for machine installations, it generally states for most machines that you have to have a interrupt in the power supply within 30 inches of the machine. And so having the ability to pull the plug out of the wall if all else fails is a pretty important thing. And you might want to think about where you locate your plug.
That reminds me of another comment about that. And these electronic variable speed, if you plug them into a wall outlet, your electronic drive is going to be running all the time. Now, some of the lathe manufacturers I've noticed now have realized that and put a switch on the lathe to turn the power off on the electronic drive. But my B model, I know, did not have that. And a lot of guys plug them in and then they're on for 6 months. The drive's running all the time. They get, like any computer, they get screwed up. They don't run. So I wired mine into an outlet that was switched. I had a wall switch on the wall that I could turn that off. and the drive then shuts off.
Well, again, you can always mount your lathe on a standard old square D box with a lever on the side that turns the power off and on. So that can also be your power interrupt.
Yeah.
And these VFDs, that's variable frequency control. They're taking single phase and changing it into three-phase power of any cycle rate between about 2 cycles, and they can actually go faster than 60. And that controls the speed of a induction motor. But at any rate, lightning likes to find these things, like it just gobbles them up. It just loves these things. So disconnecting them regardless from the power supply is really good preventive disaster.
Yeah, definitely.
Ray, do you still have your stubby?
Yes. Let me just piggyback something that was said, and I'll make a comment about the stubby. I want to throw a question out, and if you can't answer it before you run your lathe next time, get the answer. A lot of people think that when they hit a stop button, and there's a stop button and there's an emergency button. If you're killing power or variable frequency drive to stop your lathe, what you've done is put it in a runaway mode. So if you have something on there that's heavy and you kill the VFD, that thing is spinning. You've just taken away the lathe stopping that chuck. So keep that in mind, is that stopping it and putting the lathe in a stop mode in an emergency is like you hit a stop button and the lathe, that frequency drive is programmed to go into a stop mode. But if you take power, you're going to be surprised, because if you got a problem. So there's a kind of a difference of, the aspect of pulling a plug out of the wall and killing power, and hitting an emergency stop button. So
You're right on that, Ray. They have what they call a soft start. Well, they start up on a soft ray, and the same way on a dynamic braking whenever they shut down.
Correct. And so sometimes if you have an emergency, emergency stops, is all the emergency is doing is putting a lathe in a shutdown mode. It's an emergency stop button, but emergency, when you kill the power, it's not the same thing. So if you go rewiring something, make sure what you're rewiring is going to do what you want it to do, or you get in trouble. Doug, on the stubby, there's one feature about a stubby that I really like, is that I can bring the speed of that right down to 0.
Yeah.
And, you get used to doing that when you're finishing. I can sand on that like I'm holding it in my hand. I mean, I can go like 5 RPM, or I can put finish on. It's one of those simple things that you get used to it. And I had somebody ask me one time, they said, well, how do you do that on a lathe? I said, well, I just turn the knob down. And I forgot that some of them, like with, different drives, don't do that.
Yeah, mine goes down to 50.
Yeah. Well, one of the things you guys are sort of thinking about that I never sort of thought, with Barry and his jet saying that the minimum speed was 440 RPM, I never start a slightly wonky piece of wood. I always start at 0 and then turn the speed up slowly. And oftentimes I may be cutting edges or whatever on a larger piece at 100 or 150 RPM on a bigger piece. But so to me, that minimum speed is suggests that you really want to be careful with your wood. If you're at 450, I wouldn't be starting anything with cracks or something in it, because it can blow up on you. So it's a strong consideration if you're getting into the artistic stuff, and this is for me, it's a comment that some people say, is that if it's got a crack in it, throw it away. Some of us choose a little bit of a different approach, but anyway. So have we got any other people that have got, I see Randy Smith there. What's your size of lathe, Randy?
I have a Nova XP, which actually I have a question for the group. Does anybody know of, other than the cast iron legs that Nova sells? I'm looking for some legs that are adjustable.
made out of cast iron.
Yeah, the ones that are made by Nova are way too high for me. I'd have to stand on a platform. And I'm looking for something that's adjustable that I can adjust a little lower.
Hey, Randy, didn't Nova have some just regular metal legs for that?
Yeah, but I looked at those, but they don't seem real sturdy.
Actually, that steel stand they made is very sturdy. I have one from when I ran Novas in the shop that I used to put bending forms on, and it's quite sturdy.
I have a 1624 Nova as well, and it has those legs, and yeah, it's quite sturdy.
So can you, are they adjustable? Can you lower the lathe a bit?
No, they're really not adjustable. I suppose you could cut them, but they're not adjustable.
I'm going to run into my shed and look at them.
So Randy, can you give yourself a sitting pad or a standing pad to make yourself higher as opposed to lowering the lathe? It might be cheaper.
I would have to use about a 6-inch platform.
Oh,
just pile some cement blocks up and throw
patio
a strap
stones
through it.
Yeah, there you go. You guys that are maybe a bit more involved in the larger public, when guys come to classes for lathes, how many of them? Sorry, how many guys have come to you and say, "Well, I need a lathe now that you've taught me how to use one"? Is that a big proportion, or you tend to have mostly people have already got a lathe when they come to a turning class? Open comment. I see.
Yeah.
Is that a no? I'm not getting a response on that one. So
Roy,
go ahead.
yeah, if you recall, when we were at Stevens, there was one of the students there that had a senior project to do, and it required a lathe. And so I taught him how to use the lathe. He graduated and went on and bought a Nova. But that worked out very well for him. He's, wherever he is, he's just enjoying himself very much. Got to be at his wedding, and everything is going well for him. But that was a good way for him to learn to turn and take it from there. But I have it. Mine is a Jet 1642, and it's a 2-horse. We just have a new couple who've moved into Garden Spot, and he has a 1642 with a 1.5 horse. So now we have 2 lathes, and instead of just a few people arguing as to who's going to use the lathe, now we have a lot more people are arguing about who's going to use the lathe at the time. But that's the story. And way back when, I should tell you the quickie story is I had a 60s vintage Delta lathe, and I loved it. It was very good. It had no problems whatsoever. It was belt driven, but I really enjoyed it tremendously. But then I wanted to have something that would be variable speed. And that's when I was able to sell that lathe and move it into my Jet.
Thanks. Bill Blasek, go ahead.
None of my students that I've have had lathes. I have 8 lathes myself, so they have a good idea as to what's available out there. And almost every student has bought a lathe after getting lessons.
So is there one that you actually prefer to, when your students ask you for a recommendation?
My only thing that I tell them is I like cast iron.
Okay. Well, that's a good way of looking at it. You're talking about that, and this comes. And in fact, Mike Darlow made a comment last week about having something so that when you're turning a bowl, you're turning it on the outboard side or something along that line, so you've got outboard access. But the Nova that I used to have, instead of having outboard access, the actual head turns, I believe, on those. My question about that Nova was that when you, at least when I was having it, is that it didn't always necessarily want to come back to straight center. So I was a little bit concerned about turning it back and forth on the head of it. Is there any other lathes that do that twist like the Nova does? Any other model?
My jet that I'm getting rid of has a pivotable head. And when you bring it back to zero, you do have to put centers in the head and tail stock and line it up again, because it has about a half a degree of play.
That's also true.
It is index positions every 30 degrees and 45 degrees, but they at each of those positions, you can tighten it down about a half a degree out of what it really is nominally. The new one I'm getting does not have a rotatable head.
It's one of the three ways that you can increase the swing of a lathe to turn bowls. And it's my least favorite option personally, because generally it's put on lathes that don't have enough beef in them in the first place to be turning that large. And you're dependent on putting your banjo or tool base quite a far out to accommodate the scheme. And I don't know, and and the alignment thing is a pain, although Nova's actually does have some pins that makes it line up pretty reliably on all the later.
Alan here. On my Harbor Freight, the headstock does rotate. I don't know that I've ever used it in a rotate. A couple times I have used it. The comments about you do have to realign it when you bring it back around are very true. And Ernie, right, Harbor Freight is not one of the heavier lathes. So,
what's the biggest piece you can turn on yours, Alan?
well, it's a 1236. So over the bed, I can, and till you rough it out, I think the biggest I've been managed so far is about 11 inches.
That's still reasonable. And what's the minimum speed it goes?
Well, I put on the I modified it using the treadmill motor, and so I've got the variable speed with it, and I can get it down with that probably about 100. I don't know that I can go much lower than that.
Sorry, somebody else waved their hand? I didn't see that. Jim Bowman, go ahead.
Well, it's kind of like talking about how big stuff is makes me a little embarrassed. I have a Comet Nova, the new one, the 14-inch swing. I think they call it the DR14 or something like it. It's a digital readout. I had a Comet 2 before, which was only 12. The 14 gave me some distance without giving me a huge price increase. I feel a big limitation at that 14 because, yes, it's small. And even if I rig something outboard, it doesn't have enough oomph to it to turn. And I think Ernie was talking about that. But I don't know. I'd love to hear what's the best choice in a 16 or an 18 without getting outrageous on the price. I have no difficulty with the Novas. I have had good experiences with them.
Yeah, Gerald.
I have a Grizzly 22-inch, and I've been very pleased with it. It's not the quality of the name brands, but I'm very frugal. When I purchased this one, Grizzly was closing their plant up in Pennsylvania, or their facility up there, and they had a 20% discount. So I think I ended up with this 22-inch, it's 2242, I believe, or something like that. And I ended up for $1,200 bucks. So I ended up with a decent lathe. But downside, they use the same legs on practically all of their lathes. Therefore, being vertically impaired, I have to have a platform to stand on to use the lathe most of the time.
When
Is
you
that-
say 22 inch, what do you mean by that? Is that a,
Inch swing.
okay?
Is that a Reeves drive too, isn't it, for variable speed?
It's an electronic three-phase converted to, so I can use it on single phase, 220. And it does have a 2 speeds plus the variable.
What horse?
Pardon me?
They're
What
3
horsepower?
horsepower.
Yeah, Bill.
What I tell my students about the Grizzly lathes is they're adequate, but be prepared to be the person that has to fix it. Because they don't supply anybody to do anything for them once you have a problem. You've got to, do all this squaring away of the lathe by yourself.
I think that's true. I have the same lathe. It's a G07 42, and it's a 22 swing by 42 long. And I got it because it was reasonably priced, and it had a lot of the features of the larger lathes without the price tag. Bill, you're absolutely right. I had a problem with it initially, but Grizzly, rather than send me the part, they said, take the head off and send it back to us. We'll pay shipping both ways. And they fix it. Other than that, you got to do it yourself. It's certainly not the quality of a Powermatic or a one-way, but I'll tell you what, I do some pretty large stuff on it. It goes down to 50 RPM. I'm listening to the features you guys are talking about that you like. I think it has all the features of the big lathes, with the exception of the switch is not portable. You can't move it around. However, since you've been talking about that, I'm going to go take mine apart and see if I can make my own. But if you're looking for a larger lathe, heavy lathe, reasonable quality lathe at a really good price, I've had 2 Grizzlies. The first one I bought only went down to 600 RPM, which is why I got rid of it. I wanted one. Then this one goes down to 50, at least mine does. And that's, you guys talked about that feature. That's a very nice feature when you're turning rather large blanks to start with. I always start at 0. It also has a safety feature. You can't start the lathe once you turn it off without going back to 0, which I think is a good safety feature.
Yeah.
One thing I might mention on price point on lathes is a good deal of our machinery is made in either China or Taiwan these days. And they're often made for different companies in the same plant, and it's what color they painted them that day. And the companies will bargain for lower prices, and they just start taking features out or the quality of components out. So there is a difference. I mean, we're all saying that you can see a difference between a Harbor Freight lathe and a Powermatic. But another thing that Powermatic or Jet gives you is that there will be 20 years of parts ahead if something breaks. To most of us, this doesn't matter. We're not turning enough that we're going to be wearing parts out very readily. But in industry, it makes a big difference. And some people who take turning up from as a hobby really put a lot of miles on the lathe. So it's something to think about.
Well, I have to comment on that. I've been buying Grizzly products since 1984. And I don't promote Grizzly. I just buy them because they're reasonably priced. My first product was a belt sander. A few years ago, at 27 years old, the bearing went. And you call Grizzly, and they got the part, and they're cheap. Grizzly, one of their things they advertise is they maintain parts for every machine they've ever sold. And so far, that's been true.
Ernie, the other thing about the newer lathes is they're electronically driven. I think we're going to see failures quicker or sooner than the 10 or 20 years because of the electronics. That's just the way it is. Becomes the weakest point, not a bearing or not a shaft or whatever.
I think that's true. And the most important thing that you touched on earlier, I never leave my lathe plugged in because it's 220 volts, 3-phase, which means there's an electronic converter in there. I never ever leave it plugged in when it's not in use. You don't want any spurious signals coming over the line frying that stuff.
Yeah.
Why don't the lathe manufacturers put off switches on them? Same thing with my Comet 14 is on all the time while it's plugged in. I mean, the electronics are. And so I'm going to go out to my shop and put a flip switch right where I plug it in. I'll just turn it off there instead of unplug it.
Yeah, that's the way I wired mine up, but I think some of the new models are, I don't remember which one I saw it on. They do have a switch on there for the drive power.
Could I just make a comment to guys about made in China? I spent some of my career working back and forth in China with Reynolds Metals when I was there 10 years ago now. But my finding about made in China was that the Chinese were ready to deliver whatever we wanted. If we wanted cheap, they would deliver cheap. If we wanted good quality, they would deliver good quality. So from my perspective, made in China is not where it's made. It's who made the specification for it.
Yeah.
So
I agree with you. I've dealt with China in the past in my work. And the only thing I don't like about, I don't like buying Grizzly parts made in China, although my lathe was. The problem with the Chinese manufacturing is they'll make the spec you want, but if their factory goes out of spec, they don't stop. They keep building them. So you really got to watch them.
Yeah.
When I worked in video and audio, we saw a bunch of our high-end manufacturers go to China, but we quickly discovered that it was how much control that company is inserted or insisted on by the Chinese company. And I had no problems with our high-end audio coming out of China because the company sat on them. Matter of fact, there were companies who made it their job to manage Chinese production.
As we all know, though, at this point in time, they made another factory down the road and they copied whatever you showed them.
Yeah, sure.
In sometime in the 1980s, Delta sued every American manufacturer that was selling Chinese copies, mostly Taiwanese copies in those days, of Delta products. And they showed the little shaper table from a Delta shaper where they had made the patterns by taking the table and taking a shot off of an actual part. Shrinkage of cast iron is an 1/8 inch per foot, so the table is now about a 1/4 inch smaller. And then the guy in that factory takes one of the machines home, starts his own factory, and they showed tables laying on tables that were just like step downs. It was hilarious.
Yeah. How are we going on?
It's Kai.
Yes, Kai.
I've got an old lathe that I would like to show to Mike Gallo, if that's okay.
Sure, go ahead, share.
A photo, yeah. So I just share the photo. It's a Geiger lathe made in Germany. I think it's a 60s design. I don't know when it was made exactly. And I remember Mike talking about having had or still having a Geiger lathe. Is that right?
Yes, I've got a Geiger lathe, but mine's 1939 with an elliptical chuck.
Mm-hmm.
But I see Geiger's gone out of business now. I was looking to buy one a while ago because I think they're probably the best lathe made. But if I can come back, I've sent Ernie a couple of shots. I don't know if he could put those up.
Yes, I can.
Well, we'll just finish with Kai.
Yeah, just one more little thing. I bought this one secondhand or maybe third hand. I don't know. It had several previous owners, and then I restored it and made some changes to it. And if there is interest, I could put together a little PowerPoint presentation about what to watch out for if you buy a secondhand lathe and what work you might be need to be prepared to do on the lathe till you get it working. If that is interesting, I could prepare something for next week or another meeting. What do you think?
Well, let me end your share.
Ty, it looks like you have a sliding stop switch. Is that right, or is that magnetic?
That's magnetic. Actually, there is a copying attachment to this lathe as well, which I removed. And that copying attachment runs along this metal bar here that has got teeth down here. And I just use it for attaching my speed control, yeah. And it's magnetic, so I can move it.
Mike, you were going to, sorry, we're getting close to the end of our hour. I'm not going to stop the video because of an hour. I want to let everybody know that it's 10:57, so technically we're over in 3 minutes. But this conversation can go on as long as you want for anybody who wants to. So, Mike, go ahead with. You said you sent some pictures to Ernie.
Yes, just two. If Ernie could put them up, I'll talk to them. That's not one of mine. Here we are. Right. Okay. A couple of particular features which irritate me. One is tool rests. I use the tied underhand grip, which has the forefinger running underneath the tool rest. And so the rests to the left and the right are really not much good. You see there I've put on the steepest angle that you can hold the tool at, and 38 on the left, and the middle's 30, and the right one is the new Vicmark tool rest, which is 57 degrees. Now there's another shot. Can you put the next one on, Ernie? Here we are. The right hand shot shows me doing what we call a faceplate turning, so they're generally disc-like turnings, and for these you need the tool at a very steep angle. And so if you don't have a suitable tool rest, then you can't get the tool at the proper angle. And pretty well every lathe has a great gobby cast iron tool rest, and they're not worth a crumpet in my view. You want a tool rest design which will allow you to use the detail gauge very steeply. The shot on the left there is one of my lathes, and it's a small Vicmark, and you can see the outboard system which I've got rigged up. So there's a steel plate with a banjo on it. Now, the important thing, as I said last week, if you imagine you want to hollow a bowl, say you're right-handed, the natural way to do it is to move the nose of the tool from right to left across the front of your body. And the only way you can do that is on an outboard system or an equivalent. If you're going to do that, then the lathe, in this case, is running forwards. But the best way to turn the outside is to have the lathe running backwards. And then you can use the same sort of approach. But in order to run the lathe backwards safely, you've got to have a system whereby you can lock the chuck onto the spindle nose. So in my view, if you want to enjoy bowl turning, then you need an outboard or an equivalent. You've got to have a tool rest which is absolutely rigid, because if there's any flex in it, then that's going to be, that's going to cause ripples in the wood. And the problem with the rotating headstock is that you tend to have rather flexible tool rest systems. So that's my thought, that if you want to turn bowls, have an outboard, and you've got to have a spindle chuck lock on it. And then you want a tool rest where you can, and the photograph on the right, I'm turning inboard, but I've got a tool rest section. It's that middle section from the previous photograph, so that I can get the tool steeply. If you look at a lot of tool rests, you'll see that paint's rubbed off on the bottom edge, because in attempting to get the tool steep, they've had to run it along the bottom edge instead of the top edge. So that's about all I've got to say. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you.
One advantage on the Powermatic that I have is that you can slide the headstock down to the end and you can stand at the end of the ways to do it inside of a bowl or hollow form. And pretty much do the out like you're doing on outboard on what he's showing in the picture there.
Ernie, can you end your share screen? Thanks.
Mike, I believe you said you had Oliver lathes.
I used to have two Oliver pattern makers lathes end to end, so I could turn 20 feet long. And it was about a 3 feet, no more than that, probably about 4 feet swing.
Yeah, I think I saw one of those down in Baltimore. We went down to, I think it was Mark Soleil shop down there, and he had a big giant 40-some inch swing, and he had about a 38-inch piece chucked on there, and he actually let us turn a little bit on it.
Yeah. Well, we used to do a lot of patterns, particularly for the precast concrete trade. So a lot of classical column shafts.
He had one with about a 20-inch or 20-foot bed on it, and he had this big bowl lathe.
Mm. Well, there was a chap in Sydney who had I think it was about 40 feet between centres with a wooden bed and using the components very much like the old Conover lathe.
Yeah. Well,
and he used to turn all the flagpoles, and then aluminium flagpoles came in and put him out of business.
Yeah, there was a shop here that bought a wooden lathe, and I saw it the one day I was in the shop there. It had about I don't know, about 18 or 20 foot bed on it, and they pulled it apart and they found shims underneath it. There were 1864 newspapers to shim the thing up, so it was pretty old.
Well, John, Ron, if you want to, you can go down to Blue Ball Machine, and they've got a nice 20 or 30 foot lathe upstairs, so you can.
Yeah, that's
go
what
along.
I'm talking about.
Oh yeah, is it? Okay.
Yeah.
Well, it's for sale. You could go buy it if you need it.
Yeah.
So, wow, gentlemen, thank you.
You'd have to
Go
put
ahead.
it out in the yard there at the retirement home.
There you go.
Hey, whatever happened to the specifically? Well, sorry about the noise. So, whatever happened to the lathes that were called bowl lathes? Doug, you had found one years ago at a estate sale, but it was gone before we got it. Whatever happened to those?
That's sort of what the stubby is that Ray Simmons had. There are some around that are called bowl lathes still that you can buy.
The original of that was the Union Graduate, which that was the picture I had with Mike's.
Yeah.
And there is a fellow in England now rebuilding them, and he puts a VFD on them and brings them all up to modern standards, and he gets unbelievable price. The one I was showing, if you want to put me back to screen share, I'll bring it up, but this one was going from England to South Africa.
Let me get this here.
Ray, how long's the bed on your stubby?
Ernie, if you can increase the picture size once you get it displayed, we could see it better probably once you share.
Actually, the one I have is high resolution, so it's pretty nice. And you can see it's in the crate. The guy actually took two sides off to send me this shot for the lathe book, 3rd edition. And originally it was just sheave drive, but he's got a VFD on this, and you can see that you can just stand right in front of your bowl. You can get your tools at any angle you want. It's got sort of an afterthought tailstock if you really feel you need that for some reason. And by the time you move that all the way out here, it would give you a fair distance between centers.
Wow. Thanks.
Kai. For what? Do you have any idea what it was worth?
I think it went for $4 or $5 grand.
Wow.
Not as big as I thought.
Are there, Kai, just out of curiosity, thanks, Ernie. Kai, are there any German lathe makers left, or are they all gone now?
Most of them, they are gone. I know of one who still manufactures lathe in Germany. It's a company in Erzgebirge, and they, for example, also built the VB36. I don't know whether you know that one. It's a British lathe. It's also a bowl turning lathe. And if you're interested, I can have a look for a photo and show you.
Yeah, that business is Steinert.
Yeah, that's right. and they seem to acquire some other German companies that used to build lathes, and they now manufacture their lathes or distribute them. So there are not so many left in Germany, that's right. And even with the Geiger, there is someone who still produces spare parts for the Geiger lathes. He used to work for Geiger before they went bankrupt, and he keeps on selling spare parts and repairing machines and stuff like this. Yeah, but Geiger doesn't exist anymore. They build really huge pattern making lathe as well.
I think that Mike Darrell brought up a very interesting point, which is I know that the tool rests that come with the lathe I have is just a piece of junk as far as I'm concerned. So first thing you do is invest right off the bat, go out and find yourself a decent tool rest. Oh. Well, gentlemen. Yeah, Ernie, go ahead.
I'm
See you later.
Saying bye-bye.
Say bye-bye. It's been another hour, perfectly good hour wasted. Mike, thank you for joining us from Australia. Again, Kai, welcome. Thanks for joining us from Germany, and we will hope to see you next week.
Thank you.
Okay.
Yeah. See you next week.
Yeah.
Bye.
So long, guys.
Bye. So long.